Yo. So I'm what you'd probably consider a star grinder. Someone who actively spends their time playing Geometry Dash trying to collect as many stars as possible. And while I'm not very good at it, I still play a ton of recently rated levels and overall have pretty sizable stats. As a consequence of this though, I've started to notice consistent problems in levels that have started to get on my nerves. And I want to make this video as a way to help creators avoid these mistakes in the future. Of course I won't be able to cover every single case for every single problem I discuss, but I'll try and cover as much as possible. This video is mostly just my opinions too, so definitely don't treat anything I say as the definitive best way of doing stuff. And with that said, here's a collection of shit that pisses me off and how I'd go about fixing them. First of all, an issue I thought would never exist. And while I will talk about shader overuse in a second, this is so unique and frustrating I thought I'd give it its own section. Look at this portal here. Looks normal, doesn't it? It's green and wide, which means that it's definitely a cube, right? Ever since the beginning of anyone's Geometry Dash career, they've been taught that any portal that looks exactly like this turns you into a cube. I mean, it's one of the first things you do in Stereo Madness. Let's go through it and see our wonderful polygonal pal come out. Oh no. That's a shit! Yeah, you can probably see why this could get really frustrating extremely quickly. And while this issue could be solved through enabling portal indicators, the vast majority of people I've seen play this game don't have them on, so it's better to just avoid this color-changing conundrum in the first place. So what's the solution? Don't use the trigger at all during gameplay. Cutscenes maybe, but gameplay no. The only time I would be fine with using the hue shift trigger during gameplay is if you're in the middle of a flying section that has nothing in it. If you want to change the color of a part, I'd recommend the color trigger. Sure, changing the values of every single channel in a part might be tedious, but I think reading a million comments complaining about the hue shift would be much worse. Imagine walking into an Italian restaurant you've never been to before, picking a table and sitting down. You browse the menu until something catches your eye, and when something does, you place your order. A couple minutes go by, and eventually your waiter hands over a plate of the food that you chose. But before you can dig in, he pulls out the cheese grater. You're aware of this tradition, and while you do enjoy cheese, you don't really like it overpowering the rest of the dish. Say stop when it's enough, he says, as he starts to crank the handle, sprinkling little flakes of dairy goodness onto your pasta. You wait for a short while, watching as your pasta is coated in a light layer of off-white, and decide that this is enough. Stop please, you politely say. But he keeps going. Figures. The restaurant is quite busy, and it is quite easy to get sucked into the joy of grating cheese. You repeat yourself, but slightly louder in hopes of catching his attention. Nothing happens. He keeps going. You watch as your pasta is slowly overtaken by a mountain of Parmesan, raising your voice to the point of yelling at the top of your lungs, desperate for an answer, but he just doesn't stop. Panic washes over you like how the seas erode the rocks. Your head feels numb as the world starts to spin as you wonder if you're some sort of twisted, Olive Garden-inspired nightmare. Eventually, his cascade of Italian terror ceases, and your dish is unrecognizable. He walks away as if he didn't just ruin your dinner, and you look in disgust at what he's created. You take a bite. It's disgusting. You leave without paying. Now just replace the pasta with the level and the cheese with shaders, and you basically have every other rated level in the past year. The shader work in some levels is absolutely ridiculous with how over the top it is, turning what could have been a pretty fun and ordinary level into an absolute visual clusterfuck, stacking effect on top of effect until you're left with what can only be described as borderline memory. And no shader does this better than the radial blur trigger. What it basically does is simulate the perception of someone who's dying of fucking heat stroke and is on the verge of passing out. This god-forsaken invention has spawned some of the most irritating and hard to observe levels I have ever played. My solution to shader overuse, no matter what shaders are active, is to calm down. If you're going to add a ton of them to a part of your level, make them subtle. Try and lower the strength values to ensure stuff is actually visible, and avoid doing the dreaded shader pulse, which is exactly what it sounds like. Insanely strong shaders pulsing to the beat instead of colors, which makes it feel like you're lapsing in and out of consciousness repeatedly. Camera triggers were the big thing when 2.2 came out. I remember people freaking out about being able to zoom the camera and keep it still when Sub-Zero dropped. But as the update drew nearer and nearer, people are starting to become more and more concerned about how the community would use the new features, equating it to the move trigger crisis of 2.0. In hindsight though, now that it's been well over a year since 2.2 came out, I can safely say that we were right. We were so fucking right. With how diverse the selection of camera triggers is, the amount of different ways you can fumble is almost infinite, with a wide variety of different methods you could use to make your level look like a mountain biker's GoPro POV, including but not limited to the seasick camera, where you slowly rock the camera forwards and backwards, sometimes throwing in a few slow rotations, creating an effect that resembles how it's like to be on a rocking boat. Really annoying because the position of your icon and the amount of gameplay you can see is constantly changing. Solution? Don't do the effect with the forwards and backwards movements. Just slowly and gently rock the camera back and forth like a baby, since that's 40,000 times better than being forced to arch your neck forward 90 degrees to read anything. The segmented camera, where you randomly decide to focus the camera on a piece of gameplay coming up, sometimes chaining multiple pans in a row, segmenting the gameplay in a way where you can only see a small amount of it at once. Really annoying because you can't see where your icon is, or the gameplay up ahead. Solution? Use the effect sparsely, reserving it for transitions between major parts or the very end of your level. I know having your camera show off your level like it's a fighting game's character selection screen looks pretty cool, but it definitely doesn't play very cool. Like, at all. The pulsing camera, where you zoom the camera in and out to the beat of the music, kinda like how it would look like if you bopped your head along to the song in real life. Really annoying because the constant zooming in and out gets super confusing to keep track of after a while. Solution? Make the pulse subtle. Somewhere between a zoom of 1.080 and 1.100 should be fine. Anything higher than that, and it's less like bopping your head and more like bashing it against a wall. The vertical camera, where you tilt the camera in a way that makes it so the gameplay is coming from top to bottom instead of right to left. Really annoying if placed in the middle of a level, since it's usually out of nowhere and is also 50 times harder than everything else. We're playing Geometry Dash, not Step Mania. Solution? Don't do it as a surprise, because it definitely isn't a welcome one. Put some sort of indication that the level is about to turn vertical, and make sure that the gameplay during the vertical section is a step down in difficulty, as reading gameplay like this is already challenging enough. The car crash camera, where you suddenly zoom or rotate the camera quickly mid-gameplay, jostling the camera around like a hot potato. Really annoying because you literally can't fucking see anything. Solution? Don't. Just don't. Like at all. Now, of course I can't cover every single scenario where the camera screws over the player, but these are the ones that I find myself dealing with the most often. I don't personally think that the camera trigger is a total negative for the editor, aside from the fact they're a fucking pain in the ass to use. But just like the move trigger, you really have to think about how you put them in your level. Have you ever seen those shots in movies where someone is looking at another person from the other side of a street, and then a bus passes in front of them and they disappear? Now imagine before every click you did in a level, a bus passed by and covered your screen. That's essentially what foreground decoration does. Whether it's pillars in front of everything, or objects that go around the borders of the screen, reducing the field of vision to just a few blocks, finding a clean balance between the space the deco does and doesn't take up is pretty hard. The simplest solution for foreground decoration is making it slightly transparent, since you can see what's behind the bus now. This only really works if none of the objects in your overlay are layered on top of each other though, as using the alpha trigger on complex assets makes them look muddy and gross. In cases where you can't just slap on an alpha value and call it a day, here's some brief suggestions I came up with. If you have something that resembles pillars, try shifting the pillars around to make sure they don't mask any gameplay. Or, add jump indicators layered over the decoration. As for the border type, restrict the objects to just the very borders of the screen. The effect is still there and noticeable, but it doesn't screw the player over as much. Alright, I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to tell me what kills you in this image. 3, 2, 1, go! Pretty easy, right? It's obviously the sharp and contrasting pointy object. Alright, next image. 3, 2, 1, go! Find it? No? Well, it's obviously this random, almost flat, obtuse, slope-looking object that blends perfectly into the ground. Doesn't that seem so deadly? Alright, final round. 3, 2, 1, go. You'd probably assume both the building and the billboard, right? Since they both contrast with the background. But sorry, that's only half points, as the billboard is completely harmless. And you're forced to go through it too. You know what can kill you though? The fucking text that says tidal wave. This has been a topic of discussion ever since 2.0, with the massive boom of sunset levels being churned out at the time, with deadly objects blending in perfectly with non-deadly objects, and vice versa. The way to discern between the two that I find the most effective is by making the deadly objects stick out and look menacing, while keeping the passable objects obvious and pointed to. Instead of killing the player to a random rock, try killing the player to a random rock with spikes or glowing crystals, or instead of killing them to a random line on the floor, kill them with a line that has a few spikes jutting out from the top. Likewise, instead of making the player pass through a bunch of random locations, add some glow that indicates you're supposed to pass through. The next topic is probably one of the most under-discussed but important things to put in your level. A flash warning is exactly what it sounds like. A warning that indicates to the player that your level has a bunch of flashy deco inside of it. It helps people with epilepsy know what levels to play and what to avoid, and it's generally just a nice thing to do. So guess my surprise when I'm strolling through a pretty ordinary level, just to get hit with the flash of 1,000 raves. This is something that has caused me, and probably a few others, real physical pain. As some levels without these warnings have flashes so intense, I needed to pause after every attempt to make sure I didn't develop cataracts or something. This fucking bug! And the fact that I've seen some people against the idea of commonplace flash warnings is absolutely insane. The solution to this problem is extremely simple. If your level is really flashy, add a warning that stands out. Make it contrast with the level, or only readable on attempt 1 by placing a toggle trigger at the very start if you really need it to not be there. And if you want to go a step further, add a trigger that removes the flashes entirely, or a mode that dims the screen to make it easier to look at. I'm sure these aren't things a lot of creators would like to add, but the option is there if you want to make your level especially accessible. Low detail modes are exactly what they sound like. A trigger that removes decoration to help lower end devices run levels better. Funny Game invented it in 2.0, and the world has been a utopia ever since. If it weren't for the fact they're practically needles in haystacks at this point, I have played some incredible levels that I would really love to enjoy, but simply can't because my game is running at half my normal frame rate with LDM on. And what puzzles me the most is that even at times when half the comments are begging, crying, yelping for the creator to add a low detail mode, one just simply isn't added. Ever. And the vast majority of times, the levels themselves aren't even that object heavy, with the complex nature of 2.2 features doing most of the damage. So, if you ever find yourself looking at a wall of comments asking for you to optimize your level, here's a few things I would suggest including in an LDM to help reduce lag as much as possible. Particle triggers. Some low-end devices, me, get absolutely annihilated by these. Background objects. Would highly recommend doing this if your level is effect or art heavy, since those types of levels typically have loaded backgrounds. Area triggers. Not everyone can handle 50,000 moving objects at the same time. Shaders. They can really start to nag on your frames if there's enough of them. Small block design details. They aren't very noticeable anyways, so removing them in an LDM wouldn't hurt, right? Glow. Everybody used to complain about it back in 2018. 6 years later, I still am. You don't need to decimate your level's decoration to make a good LDM. That's not what I'm getting at. You can still include all your block designs and pulses and everything that makes up the very base of your level. Just remove all the stuff that causes the average user the most lag. Don't worry if your level ends up looking bad at the end of it, by the way, because that's the point. It's in the name. Low detail. It's low. If you aren't aware, the term blind refers to anything in a level you don't have enough time to react to, like a spike that only appears when you're a few blocks away from it, or an off-screen orb you can't see but have to hit. It's been an issue ever since the game came out 11 years ago, and it's probably the longest running complaint this game has ever seen. There's two types of blind gameplay that are the most common: blind clicks and blind transitions. Blind clicks are inputs that are inherently obscured, like the examples that I gave beforehand, and blind transitions are when the transitions in between parts cover the gameplay, and only allow you to see it when you're most likely looking at orbs bounce around your screen. These two problems pop up in all stages of building a level. Whether your layout has a blind click on accident, or you notice a blind transition when polishing up your decoration, it's always important to watch out for them, since if the issue is left rampant enough, they can legitimately ruin your entire level. Take Celestial Force by Mindcap as an example, an already extremely difficult level that has these types of vision blocking transitions everywhere. The most notable of which is at 66, with this massive white piece of shit blocking you from seeing these two green orb timings, which sucks. My solution to the inherently blind clicks is to catch them while you're still in the layout phase of your level. Or if you don't build layouts and decorate as you go, make sure to playtest your level a bunch and really look out for any inputs that might be a bit too jarring for the average player. Now as for the blind transitions, there really isn't a whole lot of advice I can give, aside from just completely changing the transition to make sure that whatever is on the other side is visible. For example, I'd make it so that the random white wall in Celestial Force moves onto the slopes instead of the green orbs, and then just layer the creator's logos in a way where they're still visible, and add black glow behind them to make them pop. It removes the blind transition while keeping everything else the exact same. It may involve a lot of trial and error, but it doesn't hurt to spend a few extra minutes polishing up your level. And no, making the transition auto for a little or disabling player input for a short time doesn't help. It just allows the player to die in a more unique way. Jump indicators are basically a star grinder's best friend. They're really helpful, especially if they contrast a ton with everything else, since they're a lifesaver in levels that have a ton of effects. Not every single level has to have them, but something that a few do with them, which makes absolutely negative sense, is put jump indicators where you do not jump. This is one of the most confusing issues I have ever had to deal with, because it has no reason to be a problem in the first place. Unless you're making a memory level of some sort. Putting jump indicators where the player isn't supposed to do anything is extremely counterintuitive. It makes it feel as if some people forget that these things aren't solely just filler objects to occupy empty space. There's also the very prevalent issue of jump indicators killing you. And I don't mean that as if people are using spikes as indicators or something, but as in clicking at the indicator will kill you due to it being placed in a bad position. Killing two birds with one stone. The easiest way to prevent these two things from happening is to just play through your level and place indicators where you click. Easy as that. And if the positions they're in aren't aesthetically pleasing enough, just make sure that when you move them, they don't lead the player into anything deadly. And please, for crying out loud, don't make jump indicators fade in. If you're going to tell the player when to click, it's not any help if you tell them while they're directly on the goddamn click. I remember getting to the tower segment in Dash for the first time and absolutely losing my mind because of how cool I thought it was. Going from left to right over and over again absolutely blew my 2.1 accustomed mind. Now whenever I get to a tower segment in a level, I brace for impact since I know for a fact my attempt is over. This is a gameplay type that really needs indication. Since there's so many things that the player racks through their brain, they have to process when they're going to emerge from the wall, what game mode they'll be, and the gameplay itself multiple times in a row. And if this is all left to be guesswork, it can become absolutely fatiguing even after practice. Though I've never personally made gameplay like this before, I've witnessed a lot of levels do this type of thing really well. So to help with your tower construction, I've noted a few elements from these levels that I think make them so good. Firstly, sync the flows to the music. This is what Dash did, and it's probably the best way to prepare the player for the upcoming section, without outright counting down Mario Kart style. Secondly, visibly and clearly tell the player what game mode they'll be. It might seem obvious to you, but don't ever assume what the player knows. Multiple game modes share the same type of structuring, so there's no telling if the part will be a wave, ship, UFO, or swing. Thirdly, don't put a jump right after you come out of the wall. Even if your floors are synced to the music, this is generally just an annoying thing to do. And finally, tell the player which side they'll come out of. I've seen some towers do a left, right, some others are all right, some are all left, some are right, left, right, left, right, whatever. So, disclosing what species your tower belongs to is very important. Following these guidelines to a degree, and spicing up your tower with some interior decor, should hopefully create a fun and fair experience for the player. It might seem like a lot of hand-holding to some, but hey, it's better than nothing. I mentioned area triggers in the section about LDMs, but I want to go more in depth with them now since there's quite a lot I want to say. First of all, why do people think that using area fade on gameplay, or just fading gameplay overall, is a good idea? You're basically turning your level into a series of QuickTime events that the player has half a second to execute. Take the level Classic FX Level 2025. Let's turn on layout mode, and go to the ship part right here. The gameplay looks completely fine, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, it isn't the most unique thing in the world, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is what it looks like when you turn off layout mode. In the click of a button, the part becomes like 20 times harder, having the saws only be fully opaque when you're just a few inches away from them. And even if there are arrows, they don't help that much since some of them literally lead you into saws. So how would I fix this issue? Make the fade happen way quicker. Or if you don't want to change the fade, put heavy work into indicating where the gameplay is. For example, in Classic FX level, I personally put in a lot more arrows, and turn each one to lead the player exactly where they need to go. I know that slow fade in with less objects is more atmospheric, and I've personally done things like this before too, but just as a rule of thumb, if the player has no idea what's coming up, and you kill them for that, something needs to change. Then we have the area move trigger, which is like a fire. It's awesome to have, but only if you keep it under control, as when you let the area move become the backbone of a part, it makes it exhausting to keep up with. Remember the red pill in Silent Club Step 2? The one that teleports you to this complete and utter mess? That's basically what I'm talking about, just a bit more playable. My suggestion for how to fix this is the same as a lot of other issues I've mentioned, and that's to simply tone it down. Quite a few levels like to throw one of these strong-ass triggers during the most energetic part of the level, but if you need a part to be fast-paced and engaging, there's a lot of other ways to do that than making it exasperating to play. Vibrant pulses, flashy but not too flashy effects, movements that don't affect gameplay but still add to the level in a meaningful way, the pinwheel effect if you're feeling super unoriginal, and a myriad of other things that could substitute for this pink square. There are also a few other area triggers that do exist, but I haven't really seen a big issue with any of them, let alone seen them used in a rated level at all, so I won't be touching on them. So, I know what you're thinking, and it's something that I hear a lot when I complain about sight readability. Go into practice mode! And while it does indeed help with a few levels, in most cases, it's just a complete waste of time. The vast majority of levels only suffer from one of these issues at one tiny section, which sucks when you play tons of levels every day. It's death by 1,000 cuts. I'm not making this video as one gigantic, useless rant about how much I despise every level that comes out nowadays, but more as a video expressing my confusion as to why some of these things aren't taken into consideration enough, and trying to offer some solutions to some common, long-running problems. Thanks for watching, and if you have any other solutions to the things that I talked about, leave them in the comments below. Or whatever YouTubers say. Bye. Camera triggers were the big thing when 2.2 came out.